Inside a glittering engagement party, wealth and laughter fill the room. Amid the glamour, a pregnant maid serves quietly, her hands trembling under the weight of stares. The bride-to-be seizes the moment to humiliate her, splashing water and mocking her existence in front of everyone. Silence follows. Not protection, only complicity. Yet in the maid's eyes lingers something stronger than shame. An unshakable dignity that refuses to be broken. The chandeliers dripped with golden light, scattering diamonds across the marble floor. Laughter echoed through the hall, the kind of laughter that came easy when wealth insulated you from hardship. Gowns shimmered, champagne glasses clinked, and servants moved like shadows, silent, unnoticed, except when someone snapped their fingers. Among them was a young maid, her belly gently curved beneath her simple uniform. She carried a silver tray with glasses, her wrists trembling from fatigue. Every step was careful, every movement rehearsed, yet she felt the weight of every eye. Not admiration, judgment. Careful, someone muttered as she passed. She looks ready to drop the whole thing. A ripple of snickers followed. At the center of the room stood the bride-to-be, her silk gown glistening like a crown jewel. Her smile was sharp, her eyes colder than the diamonds around her neck. She watched the maid with thinly veiled contempt, as though the girl's very presence had stained her perfect evening. "Water," the bride demanded. The maid obeyed, setting down her tray to pour from a crystal jug. Her fingers shook as she lifted the glass. A murmur of guests leaned closer, sensing entertainment brewing. The bride took the glass, then paused. Her gaze swept the maid up and down, the plain dress, the swollen belly, the exhaustion etched in her face. Then, with deliberate grace, she tilted her wrist. Cold water splashed over the maid's uniform, dripping down her arms, soaking into the thin fabric until it clung to her skin. Gasps escaped from a few lips, but no one stepped forward. "She doesn't belong here," the bride announced, her voice carrying like a cruel melody. "Look at her. Dirty hands carrying a bastard child, and she dares to serve at my engagement?" The hall fell silent. Some looked away, ashamed. Others chuckled quietly, relieved the target was not them. The maid stood frozen, her face pale, lips pressed together. For a moment, her hand lifted as though to wipe the water away, then fell back at her side. Her eyes lifted instead. Not defiant, not broken, simply steady. It unsettled the bride more than tears ever could. The maid bowed her head, gathered the tray, and turned away. Each step left wet footprints across marble, but her back did not bend. In her silence was a strength no laughter could erase. And somewhere deep in that silence, beneath the sting of humiliation, a promise was forming. This night was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. When the music faded and the chandeliers dimmed, laughter lingered only in echoes. The guests had gone home to silk sheets and comfort. But in the servants' quarters, the night carried a different weight. The maid sat alone on a wooden stool, peeling off her damp uniform. Her fingers rubbed at the stains the water had left, though she knew they would not disappear. Around her, whispers floated like smoke. "Did you see her face?" one young servant murmured. "The bride nearly drowned her in front of everyone." Another chuckled nervously, then fell silent when they saw the maid's expression. She said nothing. Silence had been her shield for years. But when the others slipped away, her thoughts broke free. Once she had not been a maid. She had worn silks, walked through mansions as their mistress. Her marriage into wealth was supposed to protect her. But the color of her skin, the poverty of her childhood, and the jealousy of those around her turned that protection into a prison. Whispers of "not good enough" had grown louder with each passing year, until betrayal did what cruelty could not. It stripped her of everything. Her husband had turned away. His family had cast her out, with nothing but the clothes on her back. She had walked into the world, carrying only her dignity. Now, years later, she sat in the shadows of another's home, a servant in a house that once would have bowed before her. Her belly curved beneath her hands, and for a moment, her lips softened. The child inside her was her last hope, her final chance at love, at belonging. But destiny had its own cruel sense of irony, for the man who had given her this child was not a stranger, not a rescuer, but the father of the groom. The bride, who had spat venom and humiliation upon her, would one day kneel before her as mother. The thought twisted inside her. It was not triumph, not yet. Only the sharp ache of fate's secret waiting to be revealed. She rose from the stool, folding her uniform neatly as though her dignity depended on it. The sting of humiliation still burned, but behind her steady eyes was a truth none of them could see. The world thought she was powerless. But in silence, power was gathering, like a storm waiting for the right moment to break. The church bells tolled, their echoes rolling across the city as guests poured into the grand wedding hall. Roses lined the aisle, candles flickered in crystal holders, and the orchestra played with delicate precision. Every detail screamed of wealth, beauty, perfection. The bride stood at the altar, her gown flowing like a river of white silk. She held herself like royalty, chin lifted high, basking in the eyes upon her. The groom stood beside her, handsome but tense, his smile thin, his gaze heavy with unspoken doubt. At the back of the hall, unnoticed by most, the maid carried a basket of petals for the children who would walk before the bride. Her belly was more pronounced now, the weight of new life shaping every movement. She tried to keep her eyes low, but fate did not allow her that mercy. The bride's gaze locked onto her. A smirk curved her lips. "You again?" she sneered, her voice deliberately loud enough to ripple across the hall. "I see they still let anyone crawl in here. Tell me, do you polish the floors with that belly too, or does it only make you slower?" Laughter, sharp and cruel, spread among a few of the guests. Others looked away, ashamed, but none dared speak. The maid's fingers tightened around the basket. She said nothing. Silence, again, was her shield. The bride basked in her dominance, turning back toward the altar as if nothing could touch her. The priest lifted his hands, ready to begin the vows, but before he could speak, a voice boomed across the hall. "Enough!" The word fell like thunder. All heads turned. It was the groom's father, rising slowly from his seat. His face was pale, his eyes burning with fury and shame. Each step toward the altar echoed with a gravity that silenced even the orchestra. The bride's smirk faltered. "Sir, Silence." His voice cut like steel. He turned to the crowd, his chest heaving. "You mock her, because you think she is nothing. A servant, a burden, but you know nothing." Gasps stirred. The guests leaned closer. "She is no stranger. She is the woman I wronged, the woman I failed. And the child she carries," his voice broke, then steadied, "is mine." The hall erupted. Shockwaves spread through the crowd, whispers colliding like crashing waves. The bride's face drained of color, her perfect world collapsing with every syllable. The maid stood frozen, her eyes wide, tears threatening but held back by pride. And in that silence, power shifted, the hall was chaos. Whispers crashed like thunder, gasps layered over one another, and the bride's veil trembled as her body froze in shock. The groom stood rigid, eyes locked on his father, unable to comprehend the storm unraveling at the altar. But the loudest moment was not in words. It was when the groom's father, a man of wealth and pride, sank to his knees before the maid. "My God, forgive me," he whispered, his voice breaking through the silence. His hands, once steady with authority, now trembled as they reached toward her. "I failed you. I wronged you. Years of injustice, and still you carried yourself with more dignity than I ever did. Forgive me." The crowd fell still, breathless at the sight of power collapsing at the feet of the powerless. The maid's eyes glistened, but she did not weep. Her heart remembered every humiliation, every insult, every door slammed in her face. She remembered walking out of her old home in shame, stripped of everything except her dignity. And yet she had survived. She had carried life within her, carried pain, carried silence. And now, here he was, kneeling. Behind them, the bride's mother pulled her daughter close, her face pale with disgrace. "Get up!" she hissed at the father, desperate to salvage dignity. But dignity was no longer hers to command. The guests' eyes had shifted. Whispers turned sharp and condemning. The bride's jewels no longer glittered. They burned like shackles around her neck. The groom, shaken, turned to the maid. "Is this true?" His voice cracked, torn between blood and betrayal. But the maid did not answer. She had nothing left to prove. Truth had spoken for itself. The bride, once radiant, now stumbled back, tears of rage streaking her makeup. Her arrogance dissolved, leaving only the hollow echo of shame. The engagement, the future she had paraded before all, lay shattered in pieces at her feet. The maid finally spoke, her voice calm, steady, unshaken. "I carried silence for years, not because I was weak, but because one day truth would speak louder than my pain." She looked at the father, still kneeling, still begging. A part of her longed to spit back every cruelty she had endured, but she lifted her chin, placed a hand gently on her belly, and shook her head. "I forgive you," she whispered, "but I will never forget," and with that she turned. The hall parted before her like the sea, guests bowing their heads as she walked through. No longer invisible, no longer small. Each step echoed like thunder. Not the footsteps of a maid, but of a woman reborn.